computer. Okay, so one of the really interesting topics that came up in our Discord channel in the bootcamp was one of our volunteers. He was running into issues with AV, specifically Windows Defender, where he was trying to have different payloads and run different tools, and the AV was catching it and blocking it, right? So this is a extremely common issue for red teamers. It's a big issue for red teamers, and for the more advanced red teamers, it's sort of one of the aspects that they have to take care of to do their work. So okay, so to start off with, a couple years back, there was this Avail Evasion framework, and it was really amazing and powerful. And back then, you can use this to obfuscate your malware and get your malware to work. But as you'll notice, right, it hasn't been updated for a very long time, because this is sort of a very dicey topic, very controversial topic in our red teaming community, is who has access to red teaming tools and how powerful are your red teaming tools. So when it comes to the topic of AV evasion and tools that can evade it and get code execution, right, it's a hotbed topic, and there are pros and cons to both sides of that debate. Some people believe in total full disclosure and like, hey, we're going to share the most powerful tools, but obviously there are societal ramifications for that, right? And then you have the other extreme where they feel like anything, even something such as Nmap and Netcat and Metasploits, are like totally horrible and bad, and those tools are ruining the world, right? So you have this other side that believe there should be no tool sharing whatsoever because script kiddies can get to it, right? So it's not a clear-cut conclusion in terms of, you know, what are the right solutions to that debate, but there are some strong points in both camps, right? So that's something for us to consider, and I believe that's why that was one of the consideration for the folks who originally released Avail Evasion, just to stop development here, right? Because it's a very dicey topic in our community. So with that, I sort of really want to pivot really quickly in terms of here at the Cyberforce competition, we are about emulating a very advanced adversary, right? We're talking, you know, top level nation state adversary. That's what we're trying to do. And especially for the, you know, when we're doing our assume breach playbook, right? So for the assume breach playbook, we're really trying to bring the latest, the best, the most advanced tradecraft that the real world adversaries have in their disposal. So our blue teaming students can be aware of that and get educated on that, right? So that's one of our really big goals. So, you know, so with that goal in mind, the next question you should ask is, how can we achieve that if our only resources are currently just available tools and Metasploit and, you know, stuff you could find on GitHub? And don't get me wrong, there are some really amazing tools in GitHub right now that you can use for AV evasion. You could easily find half a dozen of them that are really, really good. But, you know, let me get to this point first before people start jumping down that rabbit hole, right? So how do the real adversaries do it? So the real adversary, so, you know, this is just another link about back in the good old days. Let's see the time there, how, you know, you can use some of these open source tools to help you get past some of these AV suites. So this is what real cyber attackers, the cyber criminals, are doing. They actually have professional services that are available to them. So very similar to, you know, right now, if you want to get some tools, you could go and buy some tools, right? Some software tools. For instance, say, you know, you need to do some cloud service, right? You can go to Microsoft, Google, or Amazon, and then you could purchase their cloud services and you can run your own machines. Well, and on the dark side of the cyber criminals, they also have very powerful services. And one of these services is they have malware crypting service. So what these crypting services do is that you would give malware to them that you want to be able to run on your target. So the bad guy wants to run their malware on somewhere, right? They would then purchase these crypting services, and these crypting services will guarantee that none of the most modern and current up-to-date antivirus will be able to detect them. That's so this is what they have available. Unfortunately, right, we're a college competition, right? We wear the white hat. So I don't believe the organizers would allow us to go ahead and purchase, right, use these scripting service. But there could be an argument in terms of, hey, if you want real fidelity, right? If you want really accurate emulation of these attackers, you would go down this, right? But my point here is that the real bad guys, they have some very powerful services, resources in that is available to them that allows them to bypass these AVs and these EDRs. That's what they have. And so for us, we don't have this. So that's number one. And then the other point I wanted to share is like, hey, we could do the good old college try, right? We could go ahead and go on GitHub, try to write our own, right? But this is the other big important point that I'm sort of trying to get to, is that this evasion of AV, it's a cat and mouse game. That's just the nature of what it is. So basically, you could right now spend a month and you could write a really amazing obfuscation tool, right, that will obfuscate your malware, or you can download the ones that are available on GitHub right now. You can use it, but the reality is that once that gets submitted, once a defender finds it and submits it to a service such as VirusTotal, right, or the automated cloud services that Microsoft has with its Windows Defender and its ATP service that one of our volunteers is a huge fan of, and rightfully so, because it's super powerful, right? So basically, once those things are aware of it and scans it, all of your efforts that you put in terms of bypassing that particular version of the AV for that particular day is no longer effective. That's the nature of this cat and mouse game. So I just want that to be clear, because right now, some of you could try to put in a lot of time, and you guys are running into that problem. Like, okay, you turn on Windows Defender, and then boom, it catches your interpreter, right? It catches some of these other tools that you're using, and then you could spend a lot of time there, and you can potentially evade your current version of Windows Defender today, but next week on the competition, if somehow that got scanned or something like that, or the heuristics of the Windows Defenders changes in a way where then it's able to catch your current obfuscation technique, right? Then it's like, what's all that hard work is down the drain. So that's why for some people who are now exploring it just for a learning aspect, I highly encourage it, because I think that's a really important thing to know about. But don't be throwing so much time into it. And this gets to my next point about why I think it's not a really good use of time. So the next big part of this that I really want to touch on is my question of where is the battle? So in terms of the defensive mechanisms and processes in place on your target system, and you as a red teamer, where is the battle actually happening? So one of the realities right now for most cyber defensive competitions, including this year of Cyberforce, is that for some of the VMs that the blue team students were given, vulnerabilities are baked into it, misconfigurations are baked into it. But because the blue teaming students have 2 weeks to make modifications to those systems for Cyberforce competition, they can go in there and remove all the vulnerabilities. That's a fact. And one of the things they can do is they can potentially install EDRs and turn on Windows Defender. They can do that, right? So that's what they can do, right? So basically, say you are a really amazing malware writer, and you're writing this really cutting edge technique, right, that is able to evade defense a month ago, the month ago version of Windows Defender. And then you run your awesome new obfuscation malware, right, during the competition, but Windows Defenders got updated, or they now have a heuristic for your technique, and then it blocks it. right? So so where's the battle there, right? So here, I'm asking that question. So, to give you another example, right? So say another scenario here of where's the battle, right? So say the question, the security question I wanted to ask is, if you are doing some type of cross-site scripting or SQL injection against a web server, and security needs to be able to have visibility there or be able to detect that. Where is the battle? What do they have to do to sort of find your activity? So I'm asking the audience that for that scenario, where is the battle there? Anybody? Someone just pipe in. Just random guesses are good too. Come on, there has to be someone.
Could you rephrase? Could you re-say the question, Candy? My audio cut out.
Where? So my scenario here is where is the battle, right? So okay, this is an easier one. So you have a Linux server, and you want to make sure that there are no shells or no connection on your server from the red team. What do you have to do to get rid of their connections? Where's the battle, Dave?
Battles at the CLI, the battles at finding out what sockets are coming out of the system. Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. So go on.
But then you also need to understand, and I think people are talking about it in the chat, network analysis and firewall.
Sure.
You have to understand what is a good baseline of network connections.
Sure.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
And then what does that look like coming out?
Yes.
And then you can implement, host-based firewalls. At the very least, you can have a network
that
I'm going on and on.
Yeah, you can go on, but my point is, where is the battle? And in this case, though, the answer I was looking for the way I was phrasing it, Dave was right in terms of it's at the command line. Basically, a blue team is looking for open sockets and killing connections, killing process. That's the battle of that scenario, right? And then people were talking about other places for the battle, right? In terms of another potential place here is doing network analysis and having proactive firewall. That could be a battle place as well, right? So and the reason I'm sort of want to really be explicit about this is for the case with a firewall, right? That could, and Dave brought the example of baselining the traffic, knowing good and bad, and then using that to do your firewall rules. The battle there is, according to how the scenario I'm bringing up, that's a one-time battle, right? In terms of you defender, you put up firewall rules, you're done, you're good. So that's a one-place battle. Defender only has to do it once with the firewall rules, and they're good, right? With the example that about killing the network connections that Dave was saying, that battle could potentially be an ongoing battle because it's all about, okay, red team gets on, they create they have a shell, they have a connection. Dave has to be, on guard, right? He has to be aware, has to check the network connections, and he has to kill the processes and the network connection, right? So that's an ongoing battle at the command line, right? So that's where that battle is. For the vulnerabilities that the white team has added to the VMs, right? Known vulnerabilities. The battle there is even before the competition. So before Saturday, even before Saturdays for these implanted vulnerabilities, the battle is even before the competition, the 2 weeks that the blue team students have, they can remove all that. So for them, that's where the battle is. They're combing their systems for outdated software, and they're running patches, or they're turning on automated updates, right? That's the battle. And what does that mean? That means on game day, they don't have to do anything. And that leads to the boredom that blue team has on game day. When they do really good defenses before the game, then they're very bored on game day because they already did the battle during those 2 weeks, even before red team got on the system, right? So I'm hoping like now these kind of details are like, oh, wait, where is Candy headed, right? What's my point here, right? So now the big question that I have for you is, okay, you came up with some previously, right? You worked really hard on hopefully creating some technique that could bypass some of these AV tools. So where's the battle in that case between red and blue? Please, someone jump in. Where's the battle? Anybody?
The battle between red and blue?
The example I just gave about if you did some very custom malware that you're hoping will be able to run against a fully patched system, with some AV there, where is the battle there? Where is the battle there?
Persistence?
No, the battle isn't persistence. The point here is the red teamer. So the problem for the red teamer is that for the earlier version of AV that he was kind of aiming at, if he tries to run any of his malware, the AV detects it and blocks it right away. And then, so he does before the competition, our red teamer is doing work, right? And he's hoping to obfuscate the malware in some way. The classic example, right, back in the olden days, is he'll run Shigata Ganai, right? Shigata Ganai against his Meterpreter malware to do some encoding that back in the 90s, maybe that worked, right? But anyways, he's going to do something in the malware in the hopes that it would bypass the AV and run. So in that scenario, where is the battle? Thank you. Nathan's right. Okay, so Nathan wrote the battle is between the red teamer and the AV. Please take let that sink in. So the battle isn't between red teamer versus blue teamer. It's red teamer versus the AV. So in the case that was brought up in Discord, it's red teamer versus Windows Defender. That's the battle. So, but if you think, let's think about that, right? So the battle is between the red teamer and the AV, but we want this competition, we want the Cyberforce competition to be about the skills and the knowledge of the blue team. How is that in any way testing the knowledge or the skill sets of the blue team, right? It ultimately does not, because for the defender, all they have to do is turn on Windows Defender and they're good, right? That doesn't, you could train, someone in elementary school to do that, literally, right? So my point there is exactly, it's a click to win kind of thing, right? In terms of you're just pressing buttons. And for our competition, we want them to equip them with really important and more advanced blue teaming skill sets so that we can prepare them for the real world. And it doesn't take a competition against some of the best red teamers in industry for them to know the lessons of click this button to turn on Windows Defender, click this button to turn on antivirus, right? So keep that in mind, because now this sort of goes into, and this will eventually goes into the conversation about what we're trying to achieve here and how Cyberforce is very different from the other cyber defensive competitions in the past and even earlier competitions of Cyberforce. So for those who were not aware, right? Last year was the first time we did the score chat, this more of in-depth playbook, and this more, hey, we have this hint option in the score chat so you can walk the blue teamers through it. And we also first implemented this concept of the red teamers can only give you points. They cannot dock you points. They cannot take points away from you. Red team can only give you points. And it's more than what it seems on the surface. So to give a little bit of background on that, right, about why we went in this totally new directions, first you have to understand how these red teaming blue competitions used to happen in the past and still do in other venues, right? So in most other competitions and earlier versions of Cyberforce, the way the scoring works ultimately was that the blue team gets docked points if red team is successful. So if red team is able to exploit something, then the blue team loses points. And in most competitions, that's what it conceptually ultimately boils down to. If the red team is successful, then you lose points. In Cyberforce competition, how we changed it completely last year is that we are not about scoring based on the success of the red team. We are based on scoring about giving blue team specific blue teaming activities that they need to do, right? And if they're successfully able to accomplish and do those activities that they've been assigned to do for the points, then they get the full points, right? And I'm gonna get a little more to detail of that when we get to the section about the con ops with the pen testing later in the session today. So let's just go through what we did last year in terms of what we actually scored. So prior competitions, basically, if red team was successful in terms of using our persistence, using an exploit, blue team loses that points. Last year, this is what we scored blue team on, right? Do you know how to list listening services, right? Do you know how to terminate running process? So those are some very basic stuff, right? This is a big one. Do you know how to audit service log files for brute force, right? So, right, and here's a big one right here. Can you fix vulnerable web code? And just sort of these very terse statements, it could be still kind of confusing. So how does this play out in the actual Cyberforce competition last year? So the way it worked last year for number 12 is that the red teamer, he would run an exploit. So say there was a SQL injection, he would run a SQL injection attack, leverage that, right, and have it successfully run. And then after that, he runs the SQL injection attack. Then he would go to the score chat and says, hey, the attacker was able to leverage some vulnerability that you have in your web server and was able to do X with it. You need to find what the vulnerability is and fix that vulnerability, right? So that was how it was communicated in the score chat. So the blue teamer, now his job is to do a lot of sort of investigation, right? He's like, oh, hey, according to the score chat, red team somehow got on and he used some kind of exploit. Now I have to figure out what's going on. And for the red teamer, for that play, they pause. So that's another thing that you're gonna have to realize about the flow of the activities here. So at that play, the red team is like, oh, I got in. I'm gonna like totally trash the system. I'm gonna change everything. I'm gonna add 1,000 persistence techniques. No, how it worked is that the red team ran that play, it inputted some criteria, scoring criteria to the blue team, and now they're waiting for the blue team to provide the evidence and sort of the explanation of how the blue team went about doing this. And if it's of a sufficient quality, then the red team, the scorekeeper, can then give full points to the blue team, right? So it's based on the activities that the blue team did as directed by the scorekeeper, right? So there's communication happening here, and it's very structured and scripted, right? So in this case, in an ideal case, the blue teamer were like, okay, let me look at the logs. Like, oh, look at the logs. Okay, it looks like this was kind of the input that was coming in. Let me sort of analyze further. And then they, based on that trail, then like, oh, I think it's leveraging something with the code. Let me look at the code. And then they would go to the code, and it's like, oh, looks like this code has a flaw in it, so SQL injection is possible. And then they would fix the code, remove the SQL injection, right? And then they would give all that evidence to the scorekeeper, and then the scorekeeper was like, okay, it looks like your evidence is right. And then the scorekeeper would also rerun the attack. They would rerun the SQL injection attack. And it's like, oh, it no longer works. And according to the evidence I'm seeing that you fixed the code properly, I'm awarding you full points. So that is how it's working here at the Cyberforce competition, right? And some other, so let's go through some other scenarios with that particular example, right? So say the blue teamer, he's not aware of that, but he's sort of like panicking, and he's like, I don't care anymore. I'm just gonna take down my database, right? So he takes down his database, and then he tells the red teamer, hey, red team scorekeeper, I fixed it. I fixed the vulnerability. And then a red teamer, runs the exploit again. And it's like, it didn't work. But then the scorekeeper, that's not enough for the scorekeeper. The scorekeeper, like, please give me evidence of how you fixed it. And then, the blue teamer was like, well, I ran this command to bring down my database. And in that case, then the red teamer is like, sorry, that is not a proper fix. 0 points for that, right? So I hope that kind of makes sense in terms of with that score chat and how we're doing the playbook from last year, right? It gives us so much more power here, right? It gives us to sort of really check on the knowledge of the blue team, and based on that, give them points based on their knowledge and their demonstrated skill sets, right? So that's sort of a really big point that we did last year, and we're trying to bring to the forefront here this year as well. And besides that, we can have other kinds of plays too. So don't limit. So we did not just limit ourselves to this whole, okay, there's a vulnerability. So there's vulnerability exploitation, persistence, data exfil, and in terms of testing blue teaming, detection, mitigation, recovery, right? So we're doing all that, but we can do a lot of extra stuff that's really important too, right? So one of our plays from last year was like the red teamer didn't do anything in this particular play. What they did was they asked the blue teamer to do something that's very important in the day-to-day work of a blue teamer that they need to understand and know, right? And so for play 34, right, it says, hey, to get full points here, you would here's a malware sample, upload it to a malware service, show the results, show the results that you're getting back from the malware services, and some question in terms of, hey, this was the results that the malware services provided. Can you explain how that really works, right? So in this case, it's a really important skill sets that blue teaming students that will eventually go into industry and become system defenders, they should know this, right? And because of the score chat, we're able to test them and score them on this thing, even though it's not a direct red teaming actions, right? Most of our plays are the red team has to do something, but we can also have some of these really cool activities that we tell, hey, blue team, do this. And then based on your knowledge and your ability to do that, we're going to give you points. So yeah, Masons is telling about, you know, what those actual services in the real world they would do, and you're spot on, right? And these are important things that the blue team needs to do versus playing whack-a-mole. You know, kill process ID for the whole 8 hours. There's more to the competition than that, and that's what we're able to do here, right? With this focus, and I really want to emphasize this because this is something that's completely different and new from all these other red teaming, blue teaming competitions, and even in the professional red teaming world, right? In the red teaming world, you just have to be effective in your attacking duties, right? So you need to be able to pop your shells, get on, put your persistence, and then do your activities. And if you do that, you did your job. Here it's about being able to educate the blue team and able to verify the activities of the blue team, and also to sort of give them more information as well. A big thing that we had last year, and we're also going to provide this year, is the students has the ability to ask for a hint. So if they're like totally stumped, right? So, you know, they have one of these challenges, say it's like, you know, fix the vulnerable web code, and they don't even know the first thing to do. Then they take the hint option. You can give them a hint on it, and depending on how they are showing their involvement, right, and showing their efforts, you can do a little more hand-holding if they take that hint option for less than the full amount of points, right? So there's a point deduction in terms of the full amount if they take the hint option, but it could potentially give them an opportunity to go more into this purple teaming mode, right? Where besides the hint, you could potentially hand-hold them more to teach them stuff, right? So that's something to be aware of. So yeah, so now there's this so, you know, Dave is like, this is kind of like a gamified classroom environment, and that's one of our big goals with the score chat is for the less skilled, and we do have some teams that are not as good, right? And they need to know more for the basics. For them, it's more of a classroom environment. And what we found out for the good teams, the really good teams, is like most of their knowledge they have down pat in terms of they'll be able to do most of this, but there are gaps in their knowledge. So for some of these points where they don't have that expertise in it, this is where they can take the hint, and then you as a red teaming professional, cybersecurity professionals, you could then give them clues and then fill them in some of this offensive knowledge that they should have, right? And so that's one of our big value adds that we're trying to have work for the Cyberforce competition. Okay, wonderful. So again, right, big things here. So the conversation started off with, hey, you know, someone wanted to do some obfuscation to make their malware work. To summarize, in the real world and for places, for very advanced red teamers, they will have a specialized team that can do that, right? But there are more advanced, that's a much more advanced services. Real threat actors, they have services, and they also have the resources to have their obfuscation to work, right? Please Google, you know, the Stuxnet and some of these other high profile attacks. How do they get their malware to work? They have really deep pockets, right? And they're able to buy the necessary services and resources to get it working. For us, we can bend over backwards to find some good solutions in GitHub and roll our own custom. But at the end of the day, you have to think for what purpose? Like, what's the learning objective there, right? And in this case, you have to ask, where's the battle? The battle is between the red teamer versus the AV. So it's you versus the entire development team of Microsoft that is working on Windows Defender. That's the battle there. And so, you know, in a certain sense, if you think about it, the blue teamer is not getting much or at all if you make a really good obfuscation tool that get your malware working, right? To them, it's just like, okay, looks like Windows Defender didn't work. I guess I have to wait a little bit, and then it gets updated or whatever. Or right in that case, if you get your malware working, well, then they would probably have to rely on one of their other tools or one of their other defensive skills to detect you in that attacker lifecycle that you have to go through yourself, right? And it's not going to be based on just that guarantee of the AV detecting. But again, it's asking you, hey, where is that battle at? So that's something really important to keep in mind. And before I end this segment of this conversation, for instance, right, the way I've outlined it, all the different skill sets that we scored the blue teaming on. This is how you, for the people, the small set of you that are working on these inject plays, this is how you should think about it, right? First, think about what lessons, what really important lessons do I feel like the blue team needs to know, or we can like test them on, or they should like develop the skill, right? What's this thing I would really want them to learn or know? And then based on that, then you can create a play around that. It's like, okay, based on this lesson, I'll need this kind of vulnerability. I'll need these kind of tools in place that the blue team will need to use to detect this technique, right? And I'm going to structure it in a certain way so that there is an attendant solution that blue team can use to get the points there. So for those people who are working on the injects, that's sort of the mindset to have for this. With that, the last example I want to give, in terms of, again, this is about what are the learning takeaways. One of the very powerful and common techniques used by red teamers is the ability to migrate from processes to processes. So, for those who aren't aware of that, what happens is that, say there's an unpatched vulnerability within your let's say your web server, right? There's a known package exploit within a Metasploit. You run that exploit, and then boom, you get a shell. But because of the privilege level that web server is running at, your shell has that privilege level. So say they configured it properly, so it's just like a low privilege level user that this web server is running at, right? For this example. So it's like, okay, but then you're also kind of concerned because you say that the blue teamers looked at the process for that web server very closely because they do diagnostic on it and they do some analysis for performance. So you're really concerned about, hey, if they see weird activity with that process, the process you exploited that's running within the web server, they'll be able to detect you. So what you do is you use this very powerful technique that's known in the red team world of migrating your processes, right? And for most pentester red teamers, they would run the migrate command within an interpreter, and then it would enable them to migrate to a different process. So now they're hiding in innocuous or a different processes or newly spawned processes, right? Depending on the actual technique that they're using. So that's a very common thing that red teamers use. And some aspects of it should be made aware to the blue teamer. But for myself, I try to think about, hey, how can we make a play around that, right? And basically on the blue teamer side, the way that you would have to do to detect that kind of thing is that you would have to use some more of the IR forensics type of tool sets, and you would have to sort of get really low in the weeds of operating system internals and look at basically different activities with the process level, right? To be able to detect that kind of thing. And even if you go around that route, it's kind of like a needle in a haystack kind of activity, right? So for me, I couldn't really come up with a good play around process migration, right? So unfortunately, that can't be a scored play. But red teamers on the pen testing side of our competition. So let me bring up this diagram real quick, right? So on here, you can still do that. You can still do process migration, but you kind of have to like be aware, like, okay, I did this really cool thing, but unfortunately, I can't sort of come up with a good way of testing the knowledge of the blue teamers about that, right? So so in the future, maybe if someone can make a good play around that, then we can sort of bring that as a scored play. But my point with that is, for you as really good red teamers who are kind of very cognizant of the latest and greatest techniques that are available, there's some really good ones available out there, but coming up with a really good play that we can test a specific skill set versus what most red team competitions like, oh, I ran it and it worked. Okay, that's interesting to other red teamers, but from the blue teamers, in most cases, it doesn't change them, or there's nothing they can do in a competition context, right? That we get score them on. So in this competition context, it doesn't has in terms of the scoring aspect of it, right? We don't have a good way of scoring it yet. So either something for the more smart ones here to hopefully come up with some good ideas along those areas, or we can just do maybe more hand holding type stuff that other people have already had ideas for some of these injects that we might have to do, right? Where we're like, hey, observe this, I'm going to do this really cool technique, and then we could do something along those lines, right? So very, very, very purple teaming type stuff. So with that, I'm going to end this segment.